Hello, my name is Justin Bates, and I'm doing a dissertation on a group called the Brooklyn Saints. They're a group of members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints who traveled from New York all the way around Cape Horn, tip South America, up to what is now San Francisco in 1846. The historiography on this subject should be broadly categorized as either confessional Latter day Saint historiography or secular. And there's value in analyzing those side by side and their progression over time. I'm going to identify a few key sources in those regards. So, on the secular side, we have a school that's called the Secular Industrious Collective School. And that's championed by famous California historian Hubert Howe Bancroft with his 1886 History of California. It's a multi volume collection, and it's very detailed because he used all the sources that he could find. And he speaks very well of the Brooklyn Saints and their contributions to California. He speaks of them as an industrious collective, sees them doing a lot of good. And that's kind of the original secular narrative. On the confessional side, John Myers Horner's 1901 Voyage of the Brooklyn, speaking about the Brooklyn Saints, also speaks very well of them, but takes it a step further than just calling them an industrious collective. And instead, he considers them noble, faithful pioneers. And so that's the California pioneer confessional Orthodox narrative. Both of these are similar. They're using the information and the sources that are available to them at the time, but those are limited. And in my dissertation, I have access to more information and sources than they then had. And so I'm going to be able to draw more comprehensive conclusions. The next narratives that come into vogue on the secular side, we have the secular lone pioneer revisionist narrative, which is focusing ever more on Samuel Brannan specifically, who is the leader of the Brooklyn Saints, to the exclusion of other Brooklyn Saints and their contributions. One who is influential in this regard is Rockwell Hunt with his 1950s California Stately Hall of Fame, where he speaks very well of Brannan and what he's done, and basically attributes all the good that's done by any of the Brooklyn Saints to Brannan as if he was a one-man show. And this will continue into the late 1990s and onto the present day with the secular post-revisionist complexity school, where Will Bagley, specifically with his 1999 A Scoundrel's Tale about Samuel Brannan. Now, he doesn't condemn Brannan in the same way that some confessional historians will do for not leaving California and coming to the Great Basin and for apostatizing. But he does acknowledge that he had problems. He had economic failings and questionable activities with vigilante groups, but also acknowledges all the good that he did for California in developing a lot of public institutions there. His biases show through in his writing. He has a very negative view of the church and its leaders, and that seems to inform his writing. That's something that I'm going to try to avoid with my writing, to take more of an objective view of these individuals and recognize both the positive and the negative that they bring to the table. The revisionist school on the confessional side is the Great Basin Revisionist School, and that's championed by Andrew Jensen, who was the church historian for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And in his 1906 biographical encyclopedia of the Latter-day Saints, he speaks very negatively about Samuel Brannan as an apostate, and even alludes to the Brooklyn Saints in California not being part of the pioneer narrative. He just calls them saints and kind of speaks ill of them, and instead praises the overland saints who traveled westward across the plains and settled in the Great Basin as their prophet invited them to do. So the California saints are excluded from that narrative of pioneers. And that continues for the next 100 years on the confessional side of excluding the Brooklyn Saints, forgetting about the Brooklyn Saints. And if they're brought up in a pioneer context, it's simply to speak negatively of Samuel Brannan as an apostate representative sample of their group. Fortunately, there is a confessional post-revisionist synthesis, which the most influential watershed work is Lauren K. Hansen's Voyage of the Brooklyn in 1988, where he says that, yes, Brannan had some problems, but the Brooklyn Saints still did good, and we need to include them in the pioneer narrative. My dissertation is going to be building on that post-revisionist complexity work on both the secular and confessional side, in avoiding some of the biases that have soured some of the interpretations in the past that have caused a myopic view of the pioneering work of some of these Brooklyn Saints in California. I'm also going to include a greater focus on women from the Brooklyn Saints and other men that are not usually mentioned, like William Glover, John Horner, Elizabeth Imlay, or Angeline Lovett, these people that made valuable contributions to the development of the San Francisco Bay Area, but are not being included in these previous narratives. So it's going to be more comprehensive in its scope. It's going to be better sourced, and it's going to be filling some of these gaps regarding the Brooklyn Saints, and hopefully do so from as objective a perspective as possible. Thank you.